All right, so first question of the group. We've talked about a relatively specific approach to online advertising effectiveness throughout this entire discussion, as well as different types of content effectiveness. However, this is sort of sitting on the back of, 20 years of digital ad effectiveness research at this point, where we've had different types of modeling, different types of approaches. How do you see this fitting into all of the other different types of approaches that are in market, with different types of attribution models that exist, et cetera? Why don't we start at the end?
So one of the things that I think has happened over the last 20 years that has changed is the complexity of the ad tech targeting systems. Like, everything has just gotten a lot more sophisticated. The number of channels has increased. The optimizations that machine learning can do. In some sense, just the overall complexity of the system has radically increased. So some of the simple methods that might have worked 20 years ago, in fact, they probably worked just fine back then, they're working less and less well because we've gotten better and better at targeting. And these types of methods are going to be immune. Incrementality, the scientific method, its entire objective is to allow us to measure things even in the presence of complex optimizations that might be going on under the hood. But the devil's always in the details when I say that, though.
Okay, my 2 cents on this is, I guess in a lot of situations, you are not allowed to run randomized experiments because of technical difficulties, right? But I think that even if you are not allowed to run randomized experiments in practice, you can always think of the situation where you actually can run an experiment. And if that's the case, then that would clarify things in a lot of situations. For example, how do you define your metric? What would I do in the modeling to make my results more incrementality oriented and things like that? Yeah, that's my take.
Yeah, I guess I don't have too much more to add. I would say no matter what is available, the randomized control trial is still going to be the gold standard of accuracy. And get as close to it as you possibly can, and you'll be right.
There's less and less to add as this go to the right. But
we may just stop it with you, but we'll see if anybody else has anything to add.
But I'll pick up the sentence that Randall ended with the devil is on the details, and also tying back to something that I heard in one of the presentations about taking incremental steps towards the Holy Grail. Yes, the devil will be on the details, but I think we cannot let that haunt us way too much. So let's just take small steps towards it, and just take the small wins. Any win will be very well received, I think. So that's my
agreed with everything said here, and also try to put aside all your intuition, all your convictions, and especially what Ronika Hive calls HIPAA, highest paid person in the room opinion, and approach the experiment honestly from the first principles, and as if not as if, but in fact, we don't have anything right now. We don't have learning, so start from the scratch. I just want to add a small piece here. We did run an experiment on retargeting, and surprisingly, not probably to you, we found that the best performing, the highest propensity parts of the audience are completely non-incremental, while lower propensity audiences are sometimes incremental. So just all those sophisticated machine learning algorithms and approaches, test them on incrementality.
Yeah, and I'll add to that. I think like you said, complexity of targeting and machine learning, we're becoming smarter and smarter. But you do see a trend in the industry too, where marketers actually enforce accountability to the ad vendors, right? Whether it's fraud detection or viewability or whatever it is, brand safety, right? There's more demand from the industry to hold us as ad vendors accountable. So as like things become more complex, they also become more of a black box, but at the same time, we're being more challenged to own up to making your marketing spend actually something that's like worthwhile spending. So I think that's why as a company, we decided to, even if like incrementality might still be 5 to 10 years out until like everyone will be measuring on it, we do know that like, in the future, we will have to own up to it. And that's like, we want to make our machine learning more transparent, and we want to shift our focus to incrementality, and we want to do right by our customer as well. So I think like as things, yes, become more complex, like we have to apply these better methods to like remove noise in our experimentations to actually be able to inform our machine learning and shift the focus towards incrementality, which you couldn't do with a lot of the older frameworks and partially even things like PSA testing.
So one more question before we open it up to everybody. Anybody in line can answer this if they want to. We've already touched on it a little bit during this presentation. What approaches have you guys taken to different types of validation to this, to the different types of methods you talked about? Obviously, you have to be able to convince people that what you're showing them is true. So what is the different types of validation measures that you've used and approaches? Anybody can answer who wants to.
I mean, I already touched kind of on ours. I think like for us, the biggest one really was like the identity matching, as mentioned, that people can match their ID space to ours and be able to run their own balance analysis. So basically giving them power to validate what we're telling them instead of like us telling them, yes, this is balanced, you can totally trust our framework. It's basically just empowering our users through like things like ID matching to do their own validation and really not being stingy with granularity of data. I know a lot of companies are so afraid of, oh, they'll reverse engineer our algorithms, so I don't want to give them like impression-based logs. Okay, fine, but at the same time, there's like, if you want to get people on board and if you want them spending with you and continue spending with you, I think we just stopped being stingy with granularity of data and just became more open on what we're willing to give our customers. So yeah, it's basically empowering the end consumer on our end.
Other thoughts on the panel?
Yeah, so in terms of validation, so our Google brand lift products, although we're only reporting sort of one number, of course with an interval to the customers, but on the back end, we run a lot of like EDA reports just to verify that the treatment control groups are similar in terms of different covariates. So that's a lot of variation we're doing at the back end. And also in terms of the modeling, right? So as I show, our model can extrapolate to different user groups. Often of the time, you will see very similar numbers across different groups. That's why currently we're reporting on respondents. But our model essentially serves as a safeguard that we know that nothing is going crazy in our whole pipeline. Yeah.
I just have one thing to add. Is I agree with both of those statements. I actually think it's really important to recognize that if you are not able to do these types of randomization checks or these balance tests, then you really can't have a lot of confidence in the system that's being built. If the engineers are not running it, if they don't have that in front of them, you should not believe it. In fact, the Ghost Ads paper, the actual case study in that, it took us 1.5 years to debug the reason why we were failing our pre-experimental sales randomization check. I was not willing to write the paper because I couldn't pass the randomization check, and I didn't want anybody else believing that these results that we had and that the system that was in place was working properly. In fact, it was just the difference between an inner join versus a left join. There was one line of code that had and in fact, I think the actual results were okay, but my randomization check was broken. So, it's really key to do these tests because that's the only way you can diagnose issues within the system, and that's what's so powerful about the experiment, the sort of incrementality methods and experiments, is that they give you that power to run those tests.
Cool. So we are going to open it up to the audience with the wise words of saying that most of life's problems have to do with inner joints.
So true. so true.
Okay, so can we open it up?
Yeah, I have a question. Thank you. Vadim, you mentioned you're an EDLP retailer. How do you handle the whole notion of promotion in your experiments? So you've blocked on price, but one of your competitors could be running a promotion while you're running the experiment. And this is for the whole panel as well. How do you integrate price promotion into the modeling? Because more money is spent on that than spent on advertising.
So on right now on display and on CRM, we are practically not running any promotions. The fact that others might be running isn't essentially a baseline. It affects similarly test and control. So if our experiment is designed properly, then yes, we may be losing to that competitor, but the effect of the marketing campaign is measured against this baseline.
You're confident that random allocation will ensure that you're confident that random allocation will ensure that your test and control panels have equal percentages of people buying on deal? Because that's very inconsistent with what most packaged goods companies have seen.
Well, yes, because the way we split into test and control is just on hashed ID. So there is no bias in how we split.
I think this is one of those devil in the details situations where you have to be really careful about how you're defining your metrics and how you're joining the data. And again, maybe it's just another, it could be an inner join versus a left join problem that comes up.
Next question. Scott.
Great panel. Thank you, everyone. What advice would you give to marketers that don't have relatively short purchase cycles, but that may have high consideration, high price, long purchase cycle propositions? And do they have any hope at all of being able to apply some of the learnings from incrementality to their business models?
Yeah, we get this a bit actually. Like you might decide to book a hotel within the next 2 weeks, but we also try to get people to put their hotels onto Booking.com, or you as an apartment owner to list it for when you go on holiday. And those have really long consideration processes. So what we do is look for signals that people are going down that funnel. So instead of looking for an incremental booking, we might look for an incremental putting your email address into the form that is the first step in becoming a Booking.com hotel provider. Do you know what I mean?
We're doing something similar now, and we started implementing something called surrogates, or the heterogeneous treatment effect. Shout out to Susan Athey, wherever she is. But it's basically, this uses like early indicators of what a conversion is. So you're looking at things, what are early indicators, right? You have to visit a site, for example. Maybe you have to visit like 5 products. And like initially we were really suspicious whether surrogates are like not too inaccurate or too noisy or like not scalable. We just started applying it, and early results actually look really good, that these early indicators really are successful of predicting a later on conversion and can even be applied to like programmatic optimization. So there is hope to not just have this like end of stage aspect. And we think about it a lot because one of our business units is focused on B2B, which have generally much longer business cycles, right, than e-commerce oftentimes. So we definitely started looking into things like upper funnel lift metrics, for example, like other indicators, but also leveraging things like surrogates in an active production environment as well.
Hi. Thanks for today. For those who are selling, especially using Facebook and social networks and walled gardens, for example, Randall, do you guys have any tips around how you understanding channel allocation between walled gardens? Because you can understand within one, but how are you considering them across?
So I believe it was Kirill, or who had the TV and the TV, yeah, all right. So Kirill I really liked his talk because it really pointed to this problem. So I still remember biking home one day when I was at Google, thinking, what happens, what are we actually estimating with an experiment? And what he illustrated was exactly that when you run an experiment in a walled garden, you're estimating the marginal effect of that campaign on top of everything else in the background. And so I think the key takeaway is that when you run these experiments, you should recognize that you're measuring two things. You're measuring the marginal effectiveness of those ads, given all of the other optimality or suboptimality of your entire strategy. So if you're spending too much on the other channels, you should expect a sort of a degradation of performance on those other potentially higher performing channels. So one thing just to keep in mind is that as you evaluate those studies, they almost always will tell you the lower bound on the potential effectiveness of that media. So if you're seeing a 10% lift on Facebook, given all the spend, you might see a 15% if you were to back off some of the other spend. And so it gives you a lower bound on the economics of the problem.
I asked that because in walled gardens, those are actually tend to be campaigns you optimize very aggressively. So in terms of baseline, it tends to be harder because you're doing so much in each of them. Does that play into your thinking?
I would say you're doing the best thing you can in that marketplace, and game theory would tell us that you should optimize every sub aspect of the game. So I think about it as that's one game, and that's a game given that you're playing this broader game. So as long as you're doing the best thing, that means you're choosing the best creative, you're doing the best optimization strategy given all of the background spend, that's what you should be doing in every channel. And once you're doing that in every channel, these meta questions of like, should you be backing off the budget on other channels, you can actually address those because in essence, you have an estimate of the marginal ROI of that channel. So, yeah. Thanks for the question.
Provided that when you're saying you are optimizing on walled garden or Facebook or Google, that you are optimizing to incrementality, not to some other metric.
So I think with that, we are going to have to cut it off. Feel free to stalk these folks on Twitter. That's what it's there for. Thanks.
Thank you, everyone.